Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am staff writer Cody Goodwin. I am glad that you're here. I've got Alex Scarborough and Mike Rodak here with me. Going to talk some Alabama offense today. We're into the thick of the offseason where going to have to come up with some content generation to get through these next few months. So we'll break down Alabama's offense. We've been running a preview series, a summer preview series where we kind of recap who's in the room, who left the room, who's new to the room, just kind of what we saw from the spring, what we heard from some certain coaches and whatnot. And we have all the offensive position groups now out there on Bama247.com for you guys to go check out. We're finishing up the defensive positions this week, so we'll circle back either later this week or early next week to discuss Alabama's defensive positions. Before we get to Alabama's offensive positions to break them down, I got a couple of newsy items, more than a couple of newsy items that I wanted to get to first. And that is with, we'll start here. The transfer portal officially closed, been closed for a little while now, but Alabama more or less put the finishing touches on their transfer class with a couple of defensive backs additions last week. King Mack, safety from Penn State, and Deshaun Jones, cornerback from Wake Forest. Alex, I'll throw it to you. This seems like a promise made, promise kept from Kalen DeBoer and his staff. They wanted some experienced defensive backs. They got some experienced defensive backs. What do we think of these two additions?
Well, and I think they towed the line really well because they got somebody with experience, but also somebody in both of those guys who are going to have multiple years of eligibility. So it's also a long-term play, which I think is really smart when you consider that Malachi Moore is going to be gone after this season. Maybe Keon Sabb plays himself into an NFL draft pick, an early NFL entry draft pick. So I really like both moves. I think King Mack has the ability to really, you can project him as maybe vying for a starting role next year. Cam Howard played a lot as a true freshman. I like both of those moves. And then we can talk about it in terms of the offensive position groups, but adding Geno Vandemark as well gave them a lot of versatility up front, which I think was huge. I think just overall, the whole class, given what was available, right? You can only shop for the groceries that are on the shelf. I think they did a really good job. They met all of their needs in terms of getting bodies in the secondary, bodies on the offensive line. And let's not forget, again, Caden Proctor, a guy who you think can be a starter. It's just a weird thing where it's a whip around kind of transfer. So I think they did pretty much exactly what they had to do. Could they have done more and gotten a receiver? Yeah, but who was out there? I didn't see the guy who was really going to move the needle. So job done, I think.
Yeah, not as many needle movers, I think, just in this transfer window. Just in general, like there were maybe a few names that were kind of like, oh, that's kind of interesting, but not too many of those. Really, just kind of some depth pieces. You mentioned Geno Vandemark. This is important. Mike, I'll throw this one to you. I thought because interior depth, right? This guy's got experience playing. He started for a Big Ten program. I think he's got a little bit of experience with Coach Cap as well. This is a nice little addition for the offensive line, just in terms of depth. I think we really like the interior of Alabama's offensive line. So then to add this guy who could maybe be that swing guard and, just provide a little bit of depth and a little bit of competition in practice got to be a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of those things where people forget Tyler Booker missed a game last year because of injury. The USF game, he had a back injury. I think it was 2 years ago. They had a lot of injuries at center. Darian Dowcourt was banged up, and that's kind of how Seth McLaughlin got into things. So you never really know what's going to happen, especially in the trenches. So let's say Jaden Roberts goes down for a couple games or whatever, Tyler Booker goes down, or Parker Brailsford goes down, and you need a guy that can step in and play SEC football. Right now or before Vandemark, it would have been Olas Alanen at guard, which he didn't play. I think he played a couple games late last year. It wasn't very much. And then Rock Montgomery, I don't think played at all. So very, very inexperienced. It would have been, especially, with James Brockermeyer being gone, Terrence Ferguson being gone, Dowcourt's gone to the NFL. So to get an experienced player who's played Power 5 snaps, which Vandemark has, I think is a big help. Plus you have the Chris Kapilovic angle with him where he knows Kapilovic, the relationship I'm sure is there. I don't know how much of the line calls are the same from Michigan or if that's something that they're taking from DeBoer's system from Washington. I'm not 100% sure in that, but it's something where I think that familiarity probably helps if there is a translation that's needed or just hey, him saying to some of the younger guys, this is how Coach Cap does things. Like, this is what he wants to see. So I think it helps in the locker room too. And that fits a need. And like Alex was saying, they filled a lot of needs with this transfer portal class, which overall is number 3 in the country, sneakily, on 24/7's rankings here, which I think is the highest I've ever seen it for Alabama. Granted, they lost a lot of guys in terms of volume, so I think you needed to bring guys in, and you bring more guys in, you're going to have a higher ranking. Ole Miss is number 1 in the country. Well, they brought in 20 guys. Alabama brought in 15. A&M's up there with 28. Colorado has 40. And those are all teams in the top 7. So just in terms of volume is going to help you. And obviously, Caden Proctor coming back is an addition in terms of the portal rankings. He's not truly an addition compared to last year's roster, but still a win for this coaching staff to get him back. And I kind of use that in passive voice because, obviously we all knew he was coming back before he went into the portal. I think, you ask anybody, it's his own decision to go back to Alabama. And it wasn't like they were recruiting him to come back necessarily, but it's still a win for that staff, I would call it. So yeah, it's a good class. I agree with Alex that maybe wide receiver was a need coming in on April 16th that we would have expected, but there's very few options out there. People aren't going to get enamored with a Wake Forest corner or Charlotte safety coming in, but I think they are more excited about King Mack, who's a top 100 prospect, and Graham Nicholson is kind of the the one that flies under the radar. But in terms of getting the best player available, that you can't do much better than that. So they did a good job, and I think it's a roster where you can poke fewer holes in it just sitting here in May than you probably could have in February or March and say this is going to be a major problem area for this team. I think there's a lot fewer areas where you can do that right now.
I don't know if we'll see it in practice, but I would be surprised if Gino Vandermark does not rep some at center to give them some versatility, not just at guard, but also at center, knowing that Brailsford didn't participate in the spring. Overall, everybody thinks he's coming back. I mean, Kalen DeBoer said at the Regions tournament last week that he's absolutely going to be a participant when activities resume with players. But that versatility thing, I think, was an added bonus in bringing that guy in.
Yeah, and I think when something happens like that in the spring, you just have to cover your bases. It's just something you have to do as a football team, and just making sure that you have a backup plan if something happens again. I think that's completely fair on Alabama's part, while still supporting him and saying he's going to be back and expecting him to be back. Still to have a plan B in place, I think is good business, quite frankly.
We'll check out how a lot of these transfers do. I think we'll hear probably more about them over the summer. And then obviously when we get into fall camp, going to make a note too. Probably a good podcast idea, content generation to break down the transfers in a little bit more depth. We may do that later this summer, if not later this month. Something to keep an eye on. Some other newsy items that I want to get to before we kind of get to the meat of today's show. EA Sports coming out with a not new video game, but the return of NCAA college football, right? 25. They, I don't know if they released it or if somebody else kind of leaked it, but a deluxe edition cover was released. Jalen Milroe, one of the 5 or 6 cover athletes that are on this deluxe edition cover, along with Michigan running back Donovan Edwards, Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers, Colorado defensive back / wide receiver Travis Hunter, Georgia Carson Beck, Ohio State running back Quinshon Judkins. There's also a Notre Dame number 2, which if we look at the roster, wide receiver Jaden Harrison, who was an All-American at Marshall last year before transferring in. And then one Jalen Milroe. Mike, this is cool, right? Like there's an Alabama athlete and the Alabama quarterback on, potentially a cover of the return of maybe the most anticipated sports video game in ever, maybe. I don't know. What do we think about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that if you're Jalen Milroe, I think it's great. Like it's good exposure for you from a player that 2 years ago was kind of an afterthought at Alabama, because Bryce Young was the quarterback and he comes in against A&M and doesn't look necessarily all that great. And people were kind of doubting him, and he goes in the last season and there was still a lot of questions, obviously the cake in the oven and the quarterback competition, and is Tyler Buckner going to start and all that. We've come a long way in less than a year. From media days last year when Nick Saban was walking around talking about carrot cakes and all that in Nashville. So And he's the highest vote getter, the top vote getter who's coming back to college football this year in the Heisman Trophy. So naturally, you'd expect him to be in that spot. Now, is he the best player returning college football? Like, I think even the most ardent Alabama fans would say there's still questions there, but he should be right there with Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers as kind of the best quarterbacks that we anticipate being around this season in college football, and then overall the best players too. I mean, obviously Hunter's going to be top 5 draft pick, and Judkins is a really good player. He was at Ole Miss before, and Edwards was pretty good last year. And we'll have to see how he kind of ranks. But right now, if you're EA Sports, I think people know about Jalen Milroe. He's obviously part of a big time program, and it makes sense. And it's good exposure for him and for Alabama.
I'm not even sure. Is Judkins even going to be the starting running back at Ohio State? That was a strange move to put him on the front. I love his game. I think the interesting thing to me about Milroe is, again, maybe not the best player in college football. Who has a higher Q score? Like, who is the guy who the common fan is going to know more about? Like, Carson Beck's a great quarterback, but he's kind of boring, right? Like, he bought a Ferrari and everybody said, okay, whatever. Like, Quinn Ewers, really interesting. But I think Jalen Milroe's story, the way he progressed last season, being benched or not benched, depending on who you ask, in that USF game, I think he's got a lot of visibility with the average fan. So in terms of Q score, I think he's way up there, if not number 1 in college football this year.
And also, like, I don't know if you guys played this game. I played it a little bit, like way back when, before, the fight for NIL more or less shut it down. It's fun to run with a running quarterback when you play a game like this. Like, even in Madden, like, it's a lot of fun to play with, like, Michael Vick and Lamar Jackson and whatnot. But like, when you got like a guy like Jalen Milroe who can run, who can throw, you can run the option, you can, run the spread. Like, obviously he can chuck it deep, right? So I imagine his arm strength is probably somewhere in the mid to high 90s. That's fun, right? And like some of his best performances, like I know he, not the best game in the Rose Bowl, but like really good performance in the SEC championship game. And that had, 20 some million viewers on CBS that day. So, hey, like I'm sure there's a lot of people that are really excited about this game coming out and also excited for the opportunity to play with a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, right? Because how many other versatile quarterbacks like that are there in college football?
My question is, when they have the playbook, is Gravedigger going to be in there somewhere? I mean, we need to see that, right?
God, I hope so. I really hope so. Unless they, now that Bond plays at Texas, like, are they going to move Gravedigger over there? They're going to call it something else?
We'll see. He better have the 007 celebration somehow worked in there, because that's just too good to pass up.
That was Tommy Reese, though. We got to go to the Cleveland Browns tight end room now to find Gravedigger.
There's a way to, like, mesh the two games together, right? Because if I remember way back in the day, like when you did like Dynasty mode or Heisman mode or whatever, like you could, turn your guy into a Heisman winner. He plays 4 years in college, and then you could connect college, the NCAA game and the NFL, in Madden, and then your guy's the first round overall pick, and then you can continue, through an NFL career. So I wonder if they can still do that. It sounds like an official reveal for the covers coming this week, Wednesday, according to the game's website. So we'll see if it's this, 5 or 6 person cover, or if they're going to do like individual regional covers. I feel like they would be really smart to do regional covers because of how many, I know that there's not maybe a ton of well-known star power, for this upcoming season compared to last season, but there's still very clearly a lot of really, really good players, and you could find a way to spread this out a little bit, right?
But it's not. Here's my question. Like, who actually buys an actual, DVD copy of a game anymore with an actual cover on it? Like, it's all digital. It's downloads for Xbox or PS5 or whatever. So theoretically, you could have 100 different covers. Like, pick your own player and put a picture on there. And like, what's a cover anymore?
To
like,
be cynical, I think the cover is only an excuse to have social media, right? It's to have every single fan base celebrate. Our guy is on a cover,
right?
I think that's where the interaction and awareness is. Like, let's just do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we can have everybody in the country talking.
Right.
Like,
but then it's like
daily covers, except now it's just for NCAA football.
It just dilutes it, where if every team has a cover, then why is it special anymore? But it's
Mike Rodak down on NCAA football.
I was going to say,
I played Madden growing up.
Yeah, there was like always one cover of any game I had growing up. Now there's like deluxe edition and all these different things. Like
it does dilute it.
Make a decision, make it one person, and that becomes the honor. It's like having multiple MVPs. It's like, how can there be two most valuable players?
Yeah. I'm sort of glad they did not do the put Nick Saban on the cover. All due respect to Nick. Like, the game's about the players. It's always been players. Like, the idea was interesting when I first heard it. I'm glad they didn't go that route, because then it would have just been like a commemorative, could have been any year cover. So at least it's
make another edition, the GOAT edition or something.
Yeah.
People have floated. But yeah, the whole idea, the reason why why NCAA football is coming back is because the players are able to make money off it now. So it wouldn't make sense to have Nick Saban on the cover, especially given Nick Saban in some ways has, I don't want to say railed against it, but he certainly expressed displeasure with the current system in terms of why he retired. So it would be a little bit ironic that you put him on the cover of a game that would be about players getting paid and all that. So
my hot take is the name's terrible. So call it Saban football or Herb Street football or something. Like, just calling it NCAA football was weird, and it's always been weird to me. So maybe name it after something else.
You would need to have one of those people, accept an offer large enough for that sort of deal, which I'm sure one of them would. Like, that's, they're in the business of accepting big offers. But yeah, it's interesting. It's don't they do regional covers of like Athlon and some of those summer magazines? So it kind of reminds me of that. But again, that's shipping an actual magazine to this part of the country, putting it on newsstands or in gas stations, which again is probably a archaic setup.
People still need gas, Mike.
Right, but nobody goes inside.
Have to go to gas stations.
Down on video games and gasoline.
Down on newspapers, unfortunately. Sorry for our business on that end.
You guys remember we're getting off topic now, but like, do you remember like the Madden or the NFL version? Like EA came out with like a coach's version, and Bill Cowher was on the cover, and like got to be the head coach and go through meetings and whatnot, and you could call the plays on the sideline, but then you had absolutely no control over how the play actually went, because like that was part of the, like, you were the coaching. Like, I know that they have like dynasty mode for NCAA, but like, imagine if you could do like a coaching version like that, where like you have to recruit and you have to run these guys through practice and help them get their like stats up. And then you're sitting on the sidelines, and same idea, like you're calling plays. You have absolutely no idea how the play is going to go until it happens, and you have no control over it. Like, that seems like a more realistic dynasty experience. Like, can you actually recruit and put the guys together? Like, and then you add the transfer portal element. Like, that just, I don't know. That seems like it could be a really entertaining feature of this.
I love Saban breaking headsets, Lane Kiffin throwing play cards. I mean, you can have fun with it.
Yeah, I had an NFL head coach. I remember in high school for the PC game. That was probably one of the last years I bought Madden. Was like 05, 06, I think was one of the last ones I had. Because I remember getting like Madden 2002 for Christmas as a kid. And that was like a big deal, which I don't know why we got it for Christmas. Like, the season was already over at that point. But I don't think I bought a Madden game in 15 years. So here's the question. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to buy this upcoming one because I don't have an Xbox or a PS5. So I don't know if you guys are, but y'all can enjoy it for me.
I don't have a gaming system, so I probably won't unless I come into a gaming system. But I don't know. Like, I have a Game Boy emulator on my phone, but that's as close as I get to actual like video games.
Game Boy emulator.
Sometimes you just want to run back Pokemon and beat the Elite Four, man.
Hey, I won. I remember winning a Game Boy Color in second grade at some fun fair type event in elementary school.
Podcast is
free Game Boy.
We got a couple other newsy items before we actually get to the meat of the podcast, although this is entertaining. Speaking of Jalen Milroe, him and Terrion Arnold are teaming up with Walker Hayes for a Lank country song. Alex, this sounds like it's going to be horrible, but like
I'm not the guy to ask. Like, I'm not, unless it's Garth Brooks, Brooks and Dunn, Chris Stapleton. Like, my wheelhouse is like this small when it comes to this stuff. My only interesting thing now is the revelation last week or the week ago or 2 weeks ago that Nick Saban came up with Lank and we didn't know it the whole time. This was just something he said casually in a team meeting and became a thing. So I want to know the back and forth battle between Nick, Terrion, and Jalen over like who has rights to this thing. That's what I want to know about.
Right. I mean, it's just somebody will have to show that video of Nick Saban saying that last week to Terrion, because Terrion made it pretty clear in some interviews last year that him and Jalen came up with it among themselves after, it wasn't even last season, it was the year before when they had lost to Tennessee and LSU, and then they were being doubted going into the Georgia national championship game, which ended up, I guess, being right, but they were saying blank, and then it kind of carried over into all right, I got the timeline wrong there. Coming out of the Georgia game when they lost and people were doubting them, then they lost to Tennessee and LSU, and then they used Lank going into last season. And Terrion mentioned in August last year, like publicly, and we wrote about it in August, the start of fall camp. And then Saban comes out last week and he says, "Yeah, I came up with it in a meeting after the South Florida loss, which was in September, a month later." So I guess maybe Saban's trying to make the point that that's when he like allowed it on the team or became mainstream. Like, but I don't think he really knew what it even meant until October, November last year. Like he kind of brought it up on a radio show late in the year and was kind of like, I think that's what it means. And
To be fair, naysayers is a really old man word. So I mean, maybe his twist on it.
right,
Wink,
maybe he
wink.
cleaned it up a little bit from the original version that
Yeah, he
used.
brought the family friendly version.
Right, the Pat McAfee version that
Yeah,
Ah,
right up on College Game Day.
yeah.
I just think this song is probably not going to be very good. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's a hit. I hope it's at the top of the charts. I hope I throw it on my workout playlist and I listen to it when I go to the gym. I just don't think that would-
CBS SEC intro song. It's driven everybody crazy.
That would be set. You mean the CBS Big Ten football intro song?
Yeah, I know. That's why I say RIP.
Yeah. That would be pretty cool. Okay, last newsy item before we discuss Alabama's offense. Basketball related. Lot of stuff happening with men's basketball, primarily schedule more or less coming together. Over the last week and a half or so, it looks like Alabama is going to be playing Illinois in December in Birmingham, in the process of scheduling a home and home with Purdue, or maybe extending a home and home with Purdue. I know they played Purdue last year, but I think that was in Toronto. In the process of scheduling a game with McNeese State, shout out Will Wade. And then they're also going to be part of an NIL tourney in Las Vegas. Believe CBS Sports reported that a while back, but seems to be closer and closer to fully confirmation. And all of this comes on the heels of Cliff Amori committing, one of the final pieces to Alabama's 2024-2025 puzzle. Mike, is Alabama a basketball school now?
I mean, it's in fact, I was looking at the odds for the national championship, and football technically is still slightly shorter on the odds end, but basketball is right there, right behind them in terms of national championship odds, which I would have to imagine hasn't happened in a long time, where basketball is either equal or maybe even has shorter odds than football to win a national championship going to a season, probably since maybe 2002, when Alabama was number one in the country in basketball briefly. I don't know where their odds were at, way back then, but it's probably been at least 20 years back, because football was obviously down a little bit 2002 or so. It's different. But it speaks to, Nate Oates in year 6 now, and he's kind of has it rolling in terms of what his program is, and you recruit guys and they look at how past guys performed in your system. And it kind of is a self-fulfilling thing where, somebody looks at what Brandon Miller did or Noah Clowney did, and that helps recruit the next guy. Kalen DeBoer, I think, has that a little bit in terms of he can point to Michael Penix now and his receivers at Washington, but it's still, how does this all look at Alabama? I think is still an open question. And so, there's probably, it's going to take a little bit of time, a couple of years to develop what Nate Oates has in terms of the recruiting momentum. And that's, it's again, if you're looking at a guy who's in year 1, DeBoer, versus a guy who's in year 6 and Nate Oates. So in that sense, maybe it's a basketball school, but at the end of the day, it's still Alabama. It's still SEC football country. I think it's going to be hard for basketball, even if they win multiple national championships the next couple of years, to be a bigger deal than football here. It's just culturally, it's going to be hard to change that. And again, it just is what it is. So I don't know if it's ever going to be a basketball school, but it's going to be a very good basketball playing school that's also probably good at football too.
Even when Florida was on its run under Billy Donovan, it was still a football school.
Right.
I don't think that'll necessarily change. It's just a matter, and maybe it's an unfair question. Like, is one have to be different than the other? I think what's going to be really interesting this year is the conversation around both of them and how they compare, and the anxiety around football and not knowing what it's going to look like with a new staff and all of these things. Like, what's realistic expectations there versus basketball, which is like national title or bust is almost what it feels like at this point, because you do have that experience with NAS. You do have the way they backfilled, and more than backfilled in terms of the transfer portal. They got better.
Up.
Yeah, and if you bring Sears back, it's the hype is going to be unreal. So that's going to be really interesting to watch the discussion points on both of those and how they're different.
Yeah, I know that, coming into, last football season, right, they lose to Texas early. So there's kind of like this teetering of like, all right, if they lose one more time, like, right, no 2-loss team has ever gotten into the playoff. Obviously things happen the way that they did, but like you start thinking like, okay, like if it were still only 4 teams in the playoff, if this Alabama team loses 2 games early, which is entirely possible, then it's like, okay, now you got something really fun to look forward to with the basketball program. It changes a little bit with the 12-team playoff. So like, what is this football team going to look like? They've got a little bit more leeway, I think, just in terms of what it'll take to qualify for the 12-team playoff as opposed to just the 4-team playoff. But even then, should they go 9-3, which is entirely possible, whenever that third loss comes, right, I would think that, unless everybody kind of, if we have like a 2007 type season where everybody loses multiple times, that would turn everybody's attention immediately to basketball. So it'll be interesting to see this fall, maybe how both of them kind of share the space a little bit. Obviously, Alabama's still a football school, right? But there is this excitement waiting on the other end of the football season in this basketball program and what Nate Oates is building and what they're continuing to do. And it'll be kind of curious to see, the month of December, for example, or maybe even a little bit in November. Like, what is this? What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like in Tuscaloosa?
Right. And it takes a little bit for basketball to get on the top of people's minds, probably until the middle of January. Usually there's an Auburn game at that point and people kind of get back into it. I think Nate Oates is trying to take advantage of that kind of December lull in football in between the SEC championship game and what used to be the first playoff game around New Year's. Like, that's when he scheduled a lot of good teams, some of them in Tuscaloosa. Some of that goes away now with the 12-team playoff, because potentially if Alabama, like you said, loses a couple games, they're let's say a 5 through 8 seed, they're going to be hosting a football playoff game third weekend in December, I believe it is, which is right around the time when Nate has been scheduling those teams. Like, they have Creighton coming to town that Saturday the 14th, I think it is, in December. They have that game now against Illinois in Birmingham. And it's still, I think football would still dominate. A home playoff game in Bryant-Denny Stadium is going to be a much, much bigger deal than a home basketball game against Creighton. Even, what was it, 2021, when they had the SEC championship game in Atlanta. And then right at the same time, if there was right after that game, was when Alabama played Gonzaga and they beat Gonzaga on the road in Seattle. Like, the football game was still a much, much bigger deal. All of us were in Atlanta. We weren't in Seattle. So that's hard to change. Culturally, that's hard to change. And again, it makes it a little bit even more difficult for basketball to get on the radar when football could be playing those extra games or two in the middle of December.
So what are the odds, like, really projecting here? Alabama finishes somewhere in that 5, 6, 7, 8 range. So they host a first round playoff game. What if it's the same day, that December 14th, right? So then you could have a basketball game at noon and a football game at 7, like, possible? Like, I feel like that'd be a pretty fun day.
Yeah, it's one of those things where this is the first time, I think probably in a while in college football, maybe decades, where you don't really know when exactly that game, like, you can't guarantee that game's going to happen that day. Because usually, at least a year in advance, the game's going to happen on a specific day in college football. Even if it's a playoff game, you're going to be in the Rose Bowl or the Fiesta Bowl. Like, that's a very short little window. But to have that uncertainty, like whether there's going to be a game on campus, a big event for the city of Tuscaloosa, hotels and security and parking and all of that, concessions. Like, you're not going to know that until 2 weeks before. So logistically, it's a big challenge for a lot of these schools to host a home playoff game. It's going to be very different doing it on such a short notice compared to, again, how historically we've known about these things for years. But it's also a boon. Like, it's another weekend of a home playoff game in Tuscaloosa, which is good for the economy. So it's a double-edged sword. It's going to be tricky, especially to get everything staffed and everybody on short notice. But having an extra game will certainly help.
I just feel bad for the basketball fan who's going to pay a crazy rate for a hotel room. I mean, wait till the last minute. If there's no home playoff game, you might get a better rate. I don't know.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, I guess it would be a bigger deal for like a road fan coming in. Like, if you're a Creighton fan, you want to come to Alabama and watch that game, you're going to be in trouble. If you're
a Creighton fan, you're not going to know what hit you if you come in for a basketball game.
Right. So, but if you're an Alabama fan, chances are you probably live here. Do you need a hotel room or not? Or do you make it a full weekend and rent a house and do the whole thing? And I don't know. It's gonna be different. Like, it's even for us, like, in a media standpoint, trying to plan not vacations, but like potentially we might be going on the road if there's a road playoff game. If they're a 9 through effectively an 11 seed, I don't think they're ever going to be a 12 seed because that's going to be the group of 5 team, but you're going to be playing on the road, and it could be anywhere. It could be literally anywhere. Like, we might be going to State College, Pennsylvania. We might be going to Oregon. We might be going to Nebraska.
I don't think we're going.
Yeah, we're probably not going to Nebraska.
You don't believe in that rule? It could be anywhere. USC, like, who knows? Which, is logistically tough for us, like, just because we don't know where we're going to be. And then we have to assume that they're going to win and then win again and then win again. And we have to keep giving ourselves coverage for our own families for 4 weeks, basically. But that's why I hope that we don't have those full weeks of bowl game. Here's a press conference one day and another day and another day, and here's another event. Like, we can't be doing 5 days at each bowl site this fall. And by all accounts that we heard last bowl season, I don't think that's going to happen this year, luckily.
What I'm hearing, Mike, is that you don't like March Madness.
March Madness is tough too, because
you're down on everything today.
You have to assume that they're going to be on the road for 3 weeks, and then it's like, do I need a babysitter 2 weeks from now? Do I need another one? Like, and those are long trips potentially too, because there's a day before the game, and then there's the in-between practice day, and then the second potential game at that site, and then another travel day. So logistically, it's a lot of these playoff type tournaments that could extend and extend and extend are much trickier than just having a bowl game. Like the Sugar Bowl year 2 years ago was great. Like, you knew their only game was going to be December 31st. There wasn't going to be a game after that. You knew exactly what day it was on. Perfect. Love it.
For you, the casual fan, we just make a lot of reservations. We're basically travel agents, and we cross them out as they get ruled out and hope for the best.
Right. Yeah. It's sometimes if they lose, it's a little bit easier logistically. I will not lie on that one. And we all kind of have that secret that if you're going home a little bit early, then it's okay sometimes.
I admit nothing.
Welcome to Behind the Curtain. Don't look at that man over there.
Right.
This was a heck of a notebook dump. Let's actually get into what we were hoping to podcast about 34 minutes into the show. We have been running a off-season or summer preview series where we kind of take a look at each position for the Alabama football program, look at who's in the room, who's new, who left, what we saw during the spring practices, what we heard from coaches throughout the spring practices, what we saw at 8A, and just kind of the long-term outlook at each position. So I figured today would be a good day to review the offensive positions, right? Quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and offensive line. Kind of have some random superlatives here that we could use to discuss Alabama's offense as we enter the summer months. So again, strictly offense today. We'll circle back and wrap up with defense at a later show, either later this week or early next week. But I wanted to start here. Alex, I'll begin with you. Of the offensive position groups, which do you feel is the best group and why?
I think it's probably got to be quarterback, right? Just because if I had told you a month and a half ago, whatever it was, coming out that going into the transfer portal, they would leave the transfer portal with a quarterback room intact of Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, Dylan Lonergan, Austin Mack. That's a win. I mean, you have a guy who finished sixth in the Heisman Trophy race as a starter. You have a guy in Ty Simpson who looked really good coming out of the spring, very comfortable in the offense, a guy you feel comfortable with if something happens with Jalen Milroe stepping in. And then, oh, by the way, you've got this depth behind him with Lonergan and Austin Mack. I think there's not much more you can ask for in terms of, there's going to be a lot of people out there rank quarterback rooms across the country, again, off-season content, but they've got to be really up there because of not just who they have at the top, but who they have throughout. And then specific to Milroe, the development he stands to gain in this new system with this new coaching staff. I think they're in a really good place at that position if things do break a number of ways, really.
Mike, do we agree with that? Quarterback as the best position group in Alabama's offense?
I'm going to go with running back. I think, and I was going to say Nate Oates. I guess it's a basketball school. Nick Saban used to say that running back, like the last couple of years, like he was always very, very happy with that position. I don't know if it always panned out that way. Like I think Jason McClellan and Roydell Williams were just kind of guys last year, and they weren't as good as they were in previous years at that spot. But I think Justice Haynes' ceiling is much higher than what they had last year. And I think Jam Miller is certainly a very serviceable running back as well. And then Richard Young, too, I think by all accounts had a very good spring. I think we all saw him run pretty hard in the spring game, much more decisive. And I don't think we'll see much of, Kevin Riley or freshman Daniel Hill, the mountain of a man that Cody loves to watch. But
big fan.
Yeah, he's huge. But I don't know if you'll see much of Daniel Hill or Kevin Riley. I think it's going to be those top three guys, and that's a really good three. And we heard Kalen DeBoer, as you might expect, like a new coach coming in talking about playing to the strengths of what you have personnel wise. And my gut feeling on that is I think we're going to see a pretty heavy dose of the running game. We saw it in the spring game, especially in the red zone. That could include Jalen Milroe design runs. I think that's part of the running game, but I don't know if this will be as pass heavy or pass happy of an offense as we saw from Washington, the last couple of years, just because I don't know if they have what they had at receiver, at Washington. And, there's still open questions about, Milroe as a passer. So you tell me the best position group at Alabama on offense right now, I'm probably going to go with running back.
Good arguments for both. I think I veered toward quarterback for now. Although I think the running back room probably has the higher ceiling when looking at the two of them. Like there's just a little bit more unknown with the running back room, just because I feel like quarterback primarily because of Milroe, but also a little bit of Ty Simpson and just maybe how we feel about Ty Simpson. We've just seen a little bit more from those guys. So at least that's maybe where I fall. Like I think the quarterback room is probably the best position right now. I think the running back room has the potential to be the best position, by as early as late September, if not early October, if not even before then. So like, I love Justice Haynes. I love Richard Young. I love Jam Miller. Obviously a big Daniel Hill fan. I guess I need to see it a little bit more, right? We just haven't seen the production from those guys. There's a lot of experience and a lot of snaps going out the room with Roydell Williams transferring to Florida State and Jason McClellan now playing for Atlanta. So I guess until we see the production from those guys, I'm going to lean into quarterback as the best group for now.
And the one way I would defend my position in terms of that, and I do think the running backs have a chance to be really good. I think it's just a matter of have we seen it yet? I think the running back room the last few years has struggled due in large part because of the way the offensive line has struggled. And I think they have to reach a certain point, the line does, for the running backs to be able to make that kind of progress. I think we already saw what Jalen Milroe can do with a bad offensive line at points last year. I don't think they're going to be worse this year. So I think there's a little bit more proven something there. I think there's a lower floor in terms of the quarterbacks because of the offensive line play more than anything. Just not as dependent upon it, especially given the way Milroe can extend plays with his legs.
Worst group. We just did best group, worst group. Mike, I'll throw it to you first. Of the offensive position groups, which one do you think is 5 out of 5?
For a while I would have said offensive line, but look, they're the best player on this Alabama team could be Tyler Booker. And right now is pretty widely projected as a first-round pick, and maybe their only first-round pick. And Jaden Roberts could be right there. Like Jaden Roberts, if the draft is held tomorrow, he's eligible. Like he could be a day 2 pick. Like I think he's that good. And then Caden Proctor's ceiling is very high. And then we'll just have to see. Like, is Parker Brailsford what he was last year at Washington? And he's a pretty good player too. So I don't know if I'd put offensive line worst. Like I might lean towards wide receiver.
Wow.
So you only have 5 options. So it's not like you're saying it's a bad group, but is it the worst of those 5? Like, I think you're elevating players like what Kendrick Law was last year, what Kobe Prentice was last year is like a 4 and a 5. They're now like your 2 and your 3, which, has happened before. Players kind of progress up the depth chart over time, but are they like, are they an SEC, top of the SEC 2 or 3? Like, I think there's still a lot of questions about that. I think there's questions of whether Jeremy Bernard is a true number 1 that would be in the conversation to be a first or second or third round draft pick next year. Like I think there's still a lot of hill for him to climb there. So that's probably the position that I would go with. I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think there's a lot of options, and I think Ryan Williams is the huge wild card in that group. If he comes out guns blazing and he's ready to play and he's going to be your star from week 1, then I think you have your guy. But if he takes a little bit of time to kind of assimilate into high level college football, then there's still probably some question marks with that group.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is fair. I don't have quite as many question marks about Jeremy Bernard and the way he translates. I think he's got the ability to be one of the top 10 to 14 receivers in the SEC. I think he's got that kind of ability, but you do need to know what's 2, 3, 4, 5 down the line. And you've got to hope, I think, for Alabama, you got to hope that either Ryan Williams or Caleb Odom can be a dude right away, because then it sort of lets everything else play. Because Kendrick Law and Kobe Prentice, they're interesting weapons. I think you can move them around and play them in a bunch of different ways. But I don't know if they're like just go out and get a catch, jump over the other guy, like you're in the red zone, you need it on third down, whatever you want to call it. I don't think they're that guy. So I think there's a lot of question marks on down the line. But I think Bernard is the key. I think he could be really good and kind of unlock everybody else in one of those receivers, at least the freshman receivers. I think they could go a long way in making the rest of the group really good.
Yeah, I think it's when you look at the position groups, wide receivers probably the one position I would slot at 5-2, again because of the little bit of the unknown. I think I'm with Alex. Jeremy Bernard kind of solidified number 1 right now until we see anything different. I think the biggest question for me is like, where does Ryan Williams fall on the hierarchy? Like, because if he's number 2, like that could either be a good thing because he's really, really good right away, or it could be a not very good thing if you got a true freshman walking in as your second best receiver. And if he's not like up to speed and ready to go out of the gate, like what does that say about everybody else if he's already leapfrogged them? So there's a lot of, I think, unknowns. I mean, we've seen glimpses of Kobe Prentice, who I think is really, really good. And he seems like he's, I don't know if he's all SEC good, but like, I think when he has the ball in his hands, he's got a little bit of a burst there that not a lot of other receivers in the room, at least last year, had. So, but I think the question is for him, can he be consistent enough to, warrant a lot of the targets that would come out of that slot position? A lot of those targets that went to Isaiah Bond last year. So like, can he step up and be that dude? Is that where Ryan Williams plays? Where do they end up putting Caleb Odom? What do they end up doing with Kendrick Law? Like, I think there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of things I think we need to see first. So I totally understand why receivers probably the 5th out of the 5 position groups here, at least right now on May 13th.
I'd still put it offensive line. I still think there's a lot. I think to me, because of I think Parker Brailsford is going to play in the summer. I think he's going to be around. I think all that's going to work out. But to say that's not a question mark right now would be foolish. That's a question mark. What Caden Proctor is coming back is a question mark because he's been away from football for a long time. I know he's been training and doing all those things. Which version of Caden Proctor are we going to get? Because there were times last year where he looked like a true freshman who was really struggling. Can he make that leap year 2? Can Jaden Roberts be a consistent player? Is Elijah Pritchett the guy at right tackle? He hasn't really come into his own yet. I think there's a lot there that's still left to prove. I don't think they're going to be worse than last year, but there were times last year where they were really bad, and I don't think that's saying very much. So to me, they have maybe the most unknowns and maybe, I hate to say it, maybe the lowest floor in terms of if things break a certain way, they could be in a lot of trouble. I don't think all those things are going to break a bad way, but in my rankings, I would probably put them in the lowest just because I think there are some potential pitfalls on the line and some potential question marks in terms of depth too.
I agree with that. And I think there's, I think one of my biggest questions is like a lot of I think the struggles last year stem from the fact that Caden Proctor was a true freshman playing left tackle, protecting Milroe's blind side. If he's better this year, which is to say, if he was as good as he was come November last year, which he was a very good player by November last year, not all SEC good, but still good enough to not be a liability. If he's able to be that good right out of the gate, how much of a liability is right tackle going to be, right? Like I'm thinking just like literally at its most basic, if you're playing left tackle, you're protecting the quarterback's blind side. When the quarterback knows that his blind side is taken care of, Milroe's right-handed. If the right tackle's a problem, at least he can see it coming at him, right? Like maybe that's a little naive of me to say, but like you wonder how much, that has an effect on the offense. Whereas like when your left tackle's a liability and you're right-handed, you don't know what's kind of coming at you, right? And so like then you get really jittery and you're playing out of sync and the timing's off. And next thing you know, you're leaving the pocket too early, stepping into sacks, plays break down, this, that, and the next. So I wonder how much Caden Proctor's continued improvement and like, can he start at a, better baseline this season? How much does that impact the way the offensive line plays as a whole? Obviously you need really good tackles on both ends to have, a solid offensive line to make the whole operation go. But I agree in terms of like lowest floor, absolutely probably belongs to the offensive line. And that's going to be true now on May 13th. And that's going to be true on August 1. And that's going to be true when we get into the season, September, October, November too. The most important group on the offense, Alex, I'll throw it back to you. Which one do you feel is the most important? Obviously I feel like it's the offensive line because I just said so. Do we agree with that or what do we think?
Yeah, it is. It unlocks everything else. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think for Milroe to be his best self, he needs to have better protection. He needs to have snaps where he knows where they're coming at all times, and he needs that to happen for the running game as well. So there's no doubt that they're the most important because everything else. But I do think the receivers are sort of in that mix as well. You need some guys to kind of bubble up. Who's going to be the guy when I'm on third down and somebody's chasing me? I can just look for his number and throw it no matter what. I think if Jeremy Bernard can develop into that guy, Caleb Odom being a red zone threat, I think that would really help the offense overall. But it's the line. There's no doubt about that, just because of the question marks that are there and the way the domino effect for the rest of the offense.
Mike, are we in agreement, or what do we think is the most important offensive position group?
I mean, I think in general, for any team, it has to be the quarterback, because I think quarterback is always the most important position on the field. So again, it's all kind of semantics in terms of like chicken or the egg. Like if you don't have a good offensive line, can your quarterback be good? If you don't have a good quarterback, can your offense be good? Like it's all connected. It's football. But to me, in Kalen DeBoer's offense, pro style, a little bit more complex, a lot of motions, a lot of shifts. Like your quarterback needs to be knowing what's going on with the whole picture of the offense. And that's something that DeBoer's talked about the last couple of times that he's spoken about Jalen Milroe, was kind of not just thinking about the play, but kind of looking big picture and running the entire offense and not just running that play. And that's, we saw, I think, an ability for Milroe to do that to some extent last year. I think it's all agreed upon. There's still growth that needs to happen on his end in terms of reading defenses and being a more traditional quarterback. And that's, I don't think we should take that for granted with him. Like he's going to be able to just seamlessly run Kalen DeBoer's pro style offense. Like there's questions there. So to me, that's still the most important position because again, I think you can run the ball. You can try to win that way. It's still 2024. It's still, it's still a passing driven game. It's still an offense that you need to have a competent offense to win a national championship. Like, so it still comes down to the quarterback to me. I think that's still the most important position on the field.
Can I cheat and go back and say that not a specific position? As I was thinking about this and thinking about semantics, not a position group, although it affects the offensive line and the running backs. Their ability to run the football between the tackles, I think, is going to be enormous because they've struggled on first down in terms of staying in front of the chains, and they've struggled on third and short. If they can figure out those two things, you're automatically a better football team. So as I'm sitting here thinking about it, like that was one where it's just like they can fix that, and that's the O-line, that's the running backs. Everything else gets a little bit better.
Yeah. And Mike, to your point about, the quarterbacks being the most important position, honestly, the first thing that came to mind was, and this is going to sound funny because it's a defensive player that I'm about to talk about, but bear with me. I thought of Caleb Downs, and thinking of Caleb Downs playing safety, right? Not exactly the quarterback of the defense, but kind of a quarterback adjacent position for the defense. In talking to coaches and, his teammates about the way that he was able to play last year, freshman All-American, you could argue potentially a true, regardless of age, All-American. I think he was that good at times last year. A lot of things that coaches and players, at all levels that I heard of is that, like, Caleb Downs not only knows what his role is on a given play, but he knows and fully understands the role of the other 10 guys on the defense, which is one of the things that made him so incredibly good game after game, play after play, series after series. That's something that, like, obviously, a quarterback needs to know as well. Like, what's the protection like? What routes are my guys running? Do I need to call back a running back in to help with pass protection? Does he need to run a, route or this, that, or the next, whatever the case may be? When your quarterback understands all that, like, obviously, like, he's able to see a whole lot of different things, and it just makes him a better overall player because he understands where everybody is going, what everybody is capable of doing. That's what made Caleb Downs so great defensively. That's what can make or break a quarterback offensively, right? Like, it's not just 1, 2, 3. What are your reads? It's like, okay, I understand what everybody's doing. I understand what the defense is about to throw at me. I understand what my guys can handle. I understand where my guys are going to be when they're out running routes, or what we can do this, or what we can do that, or just, I don't know. There's something to the idea that, like, the quarterback needs to know all of that. And again, we've harped on this since, DeBoer got hired. Can Jalen Milroe, can anybody in that quarterback room, fully understand and fully process what DeBoer and Sheridan and Shepard and all those guys asked of them play to play? And if they can, great, they're going to play. And if not, they're going to find somebody in that room that can, which is what makes the quarterback position and what has made the quarterback position so incredibly fascinating, I think, since DeBoer got the job at Alabama. So,
and not to go on too much of a tangent, but I think that's the biggest thing for Milroe that's going to determine where he gets drafted next year is how does he run this offense? And it's not about his foot, his feet, or his arm strength or any of that. It's how does he run this offense? Because DeBoer's offense is almost as close to an NFL offense as you're going to get. He's talked about how he borrows things from, Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan, and he watches film and they show players film of NFL teams. And this is going to be a really good evaluation opportunity for scouts to look at Milroe in this system and how he runs it. And that's going to be the difference between him potentially going to the top 5, as some people have a little bit boldly predicted, and him being a 3rd or 4th or 5th round pick. Like that's going to be a big difference. So this is a huge opportunity for him in this Alabama system with DeBoer's offense.
It's a good point. Mike, I'll throw it back to you. Position group on the offense that we think will overperform this season.
Tight end? No. I don't know. Tight end's just kind of there.
Finally, some tight end love.
It's just kind of there. Like they're a solid group. I don't think they're spectacular. Overperform? I don't know. I guess I'll stick with my theme then and go with the offensive line. Just because the more I think about it, the more I look at it, I think they got a shot. Like, Alex said, to be better than last year. I don't think they're going to be worse, but Tyler Booker's a really good player. Jaden Roberts looked really good at the end of last year. So if Caden Proctor can be what everybody thinks he can be, and he was for a while. There was a stretch last year. I think it was the SEC championship game. He played really well.
Good.
Yeah.
If he can be that, then you got 3 guys. And again, if you get Brailsford on board in terms of being what he was last year, then you got 4. And then you can kind of figure out the right tackle spot. But like that potentially could be a really good group. Like it has the ability on paper in terms of talent and recruiting rankings and all that, like to be a really good group. And I think maybe that gets overlooked, but it's harder. Like I said at the beginning of the show, it's harder for me to poke holes in the offensive line and now than it would have been a few months ago. I think especially with Vandemark backing him up and you got Proctor back, like it's a decent group. I think it's a decent group with the potential to be really good, really great potentially.
Yeah. Alex,
which group about the running backs? That's kind of how I look at that. I think once we get in a month into the season, you're going to have a lot of people outside of the state of Alabama going, "Where did these guys come from?" Because we know their names, but I don't think people nationally do. And I think if the offensive line is better, I think if Jalen Milroe is better and it's just more functional, I think you're going to see a lot of production out of Justice Hayes and Jam Miller. I think the home run ability of Jam, the down and out ability of Justice, and then Richard Young just being able to come in and run really hard off the bench. I think they have the potential to be really good, and I think they could way overperform expectations, especially compared to what Alabama's offense running game has been the last few years, which I would say, even when Jahmyr Gibbs was around, was underwhelming because they weren't consistently good and they couldn't run ball between the tackles the way they wanted to. I think they have the ability, if things break the right way, to do that this year.
Yeah, I like both of those. Alex, I'll throw it back to you. Which position group do you think will underperform this season?
Oh, I'm overall positive about the whole offense because I do think the additions they've made at the offensive line has really shored that position up. I think, not to be a cop out, I think the tight ends could kind of disappear. I mean, I think just the way, if things break in terms of the receivers, what Caleb Odom's able to bring in terms of size, they may look and say, well, why do we need to put a tight end out there just for tight end's sake? I think if you're talking about underperforming, I don't think there's sky high expectations, but I just don't know what the production for that group is going to look like. They're my biggest unknown, and they're the biggest one that I think could just kind of fall by the wayside. And maybe that's not a bad thing for the offense, but it's probably a bad thing for the people in that room. But to me, they're the one that I just go, I don't know what the heck's going to happen with them.
Mike, do you agree with Alex's tight end disrespect, or do you think that which position group do you think may underperform in the fall?
Yeah, I think the tight ends are just there. I think CJ Dupree can be a perfectly fine player who can block well, make a few catches here and there. I think Robbie Oots can be a pretty good blocker for him. I don't know if they're going to be Gronk and whoever else out there, Travis Kelce, like
baby Gronk.
I don't think that's what DeBoer's offense is either. So again, I think it all, underwhelming is all relative to expectations. And I think for me, I think the expectation to wide receiver are probably a little bit higher than they should be. I think some of that might just be Ryan Williams and kind of the unknown of a freshman wide receiver coming in. Like, we don't know how it's going to look in year one. And even, freshman wide receivers, even wide receivers who became great at Alabama, they weren't always great as freshmen. Devontae Smith didn't really do a whole lot as a freshman until his catch at the end of the national championship game. Jerry Jeudy, I don't think did a ton his freshman year either. Again, these became really good players over 2 or 3 years. Will that be the case for Ryan Williams right away? And if it's not, yeah, I agree. Jeremy Bernard can be 10 to 14, top 10 to 14 in the SEC at wide receiver, but that puts him in the bottom tier of number one wide receivers in the SEC, where historically Alabama's usually had a guy in the top 5 at least. And that has dropped off the last couple of years, but they don't have a Devontae Smith. They don't have a Jameson Williams. They don't have a Jerry Jeudy. Like, they don't have what Texas had last year in Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. They don't have what LSU had last year, Neighbors and Thomas. Like, it's a little bit of an underwhelming group. I think it's a product of they're just kind of in between things with losing Bond in the portal. You had some recruiting hiccups. Jamie French, I think, was supposed to be part of their class next year. It's just they're kind of in between at wide receiver right now. I think it's going to take time to build that back. Obviously, having Ryan Williams for hopefully in their case the next 3 years, I think would be ideal. I think getting Derek Smith, who's a really highly rated recruit coming in next year, will help. I don't know if Kobe Prentice or Kendrick Law are ever going to be like the top, first round pick type of talent, but they could be helpful. I think, again, Jeremy Bernard to me is probably a mid-round pick until proven he can be like a top end, number one guy that's a first round pick. So there's just a lot of questions there, and they're going to be a very, very young group with a lot of inexperienced players that also lost Jalen Hale. So again, it's all relative to expectations, but to me, that has the potential to be a little bit underwhelming, where halfway through the season, we're looking at the stats and saying, what do they really have at receiver and how much of a problem is that?
I think that's all fair. A quick note on the tight ends, though. There will be a role for them in this offense, but I think it's just like, what kind of role do they have? Because when you look back at Washington the last couple of years, obviously the offense starts with Michael Penix, and then you've got Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan. Jack Westover was the number 4 receiving target in that offense last year. 46 catches, 400 yards, 4 touchdowns, about 10 yards per catch. When you look at overall target share, obviously you start with the 3 receivers, but Jack Westover also had, the 4th most targets overall in that offense. Then there's also tight end Devin Culp. He was a 7th round pick, I believe, for Tampa Bay. Jack Westover, I think, was an undrafted free agent with Seattle. Shout out Ryan Grubb. Devin Culp, 16 receptions, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, 13 yards per reception. So there is space in this offense, or I think there is space. You look back at some of, DeBoer's past head coaching stops, like Fresno State, when he was the offensive coordinator in Indiana, when he was the offensive coordinator used to Michigan. He finds ways to get his tight ends involved. When you look at Alabama's tight end room, I don't know that you see, you don't see Travis Kelce, you don't see Rob Gronkowski, you don't see Evan Ingram, you don't see
George Kittle.
You don't see major receiving targets in guys like CJ Dupree and Josh Cuevas and Robbie Oots and Jay Lindsey. Literally, I think the most hyped tight end that we thought was going to be on this roster has since moved to receiver with Caleb Odom, right? Amar Niblack left. So that's just, it's a collection of dudes. But I think I am kind of curious to see, and maybe this kind of gets into the last thing I wanted to hit on here before we signed off today, the group that we still have a question about. Maybe my question is about the tight end room. How does DeBoer use them? I know that there's a role for them in this offense somewhere, but what's it going to look like? I don't know. But I'm really curious to see how they're going to find out, because again, collection of, athletes in that room. They're not going to, it's not the best collection of athletes, I suppose, but they're guys that can do the job. They're gritty guys. They can block, they can catch. They often don't, but they can. So what does that mean for their role in the 2024 Alabama offense? I'm not sure yet, but maybe that's my question. I'm not sure what it'll look like, but I am curious to see, what it looks like, I suppose. So that's my tight end rant. I'll end it there. Mike, I'll throw it back to you for the last superlative. What's the one group that you still have a question about as we enter the summer months?
Quarterback. I mean, it's hard for me to look past. And, there was a thread on our board the other day about like going back to the Michigan game, people rewatching that. And that was not a great game for Jalen Milroe. And part of that was the offensive line, but there was a lot of big plays that kind of collapsed on him. And then he had to fumble. The passing game just was not there for Alabama on that afternoon. And look, to me, you go to Wisconsin the second week of the season. This is not old school Wisconsin. This is high flying Wisconsin. And you're on the road with a brand new coach, week 2, a team that hasn't really played together a whole lot. And you might need to get into a little bit of a shootout with them to score 25, 30, 35 points to win that game. Can Jalen Milroe do that? I think is still a question. And then 2 weeks after that, you have the Georgia game. And you're talking about Carson Beck coming back for revenge. And Beck, we saw that first drive, the Georgia SEC championship game, we saw what that Georgia offense could be.
Carved him up.
With Brock Bowers, granted, but that's still obviously a really good Georgia team. And if Jalen Milroe can't show up enough in those 2 games and you're in a position where you're 2-2 coming out of September, look, I think there's legitimate questions, and it's a very good quarterback depth chart. Do you have a better quarterback on the roster? Like, I think there can be a lot of positive vibes around Jalen Milroe right now. I think Kalen DeBoer is certainly impressed and he's happy with him and all that. But like, until bleep hits the fan, sometimes you don't really know what you're going to do. And if there is a bleep hits the fan situation for this team by the start of October, what do you do at quarterback? And again, you have other options. You have some talented guys behind them. So I don't know. It's going to be an maybe it's not in terms of the biggest question. It's just, how does it all work? Like, what's the end game for Jalen Milroe? Is this the dream season that he gets the coach of his dreams and becomes a first round NFL draft pick? Or is this the nightmare season where it just doesn't work for him and somebody else steps in? Like, there's a wide range of outcomes at quarterback for me and for the offense in general. I think that's still the biggest question for me.
I like that. I like that a lot. Alex, is there one group on the offense that you still have a question about, or do you agree with Mike on the quarterbacks?
I agree, but for a slightly different reason. I think Jalen Milroe, all of those questions about him are fair. He has a lot of development left to go. The biggest question for me is play calling. Is his quarterback coach? Is what version of Nick Sheridan are we getting? Are we getting the guy who you talk to coaches and they light up about how brilliant this guy is? Well, he got fired at Indiana. And, things really broke against him. There were a lot of injuries, especially at the quarterback position. I don't know who would have succeeded there, but I think he's still, because of his age, because that's still on his resume, because he's walking into a very new situation with a different kind of quarterback who's already got a lot of experience. I think there's a lot of questions about what he's going to be as a play caller and working with Jalen Milroe. So I think it's quarterback by extension, the play caller though, because I think I have a lot of question marks about what it's going to look like. I think it can be really successful. Don't get me wrong, but I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't know. Here's what they're going to call on, 3rd and 7 on the 38, and they can't kick a field goal. Like that's the guy. That's to me what I'm waiting to see, and the biggest question mark that I have is what the play calling is going to look like.
I like that. I like that a lot. That is Alabama's offense as we know it right now on May 13th. We'll be back sometime, either maybe later this week, early next week, to discuss the defense once we get all of those previews rolled out on Bama247.com. So be sure to go check those out in the meantime. Also, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. You can get all of our summer previews as well as all of our podcasts and all of our other Alabama football and basketball content. Probably going to have a little bit of softball and baseball coming up here too, with the NCAA softball tournament starting this weekend. Alabama's hosting a regional once again, and baseball's wrapping up their regular season against Auburn before the SEC tournament next week. That's in Hoover. As always, we appreciate you guys listening. Alex and Mike, always appreciate you guys joining me, and we will talk to you all again soon.